We had a big discussion on the way down whether I would say good afternoon or good evening. So I will say good afternoon and good evening. But ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is a great honour and a privilege to be here, and I thank Joe very much for the invitation to come and address you. Particularly, the topic is so important and so fundamentally important to An Garda Síochána, reform of the justice system, and in particular the reform of An Garda Síochána. And as Joe has said, it is probably one of the most fundamental issues that will affect every single citizen of this state. So it is a great privilege indeed to be here to address you and to share with you some of my ideas and some of my opinions on what we are doing, what we need to do, and hopefully where we can together, and with the support of the communities that we serve, where we can go. And I think it's important to say at the outset, yesterday this summer school heard a description of An Garda Síochána as a national body with a proven and proud track record, which is widely trusted to do a complex and constantly evolving task. And I thought that was a very interesting description. And I thought the description is all the more important because it was the fact it was the Minister for Justice who articulated that definition is very important. Because the Minister, from the moment she took up the role, demanded a sea change in the way policing is delivered in this country. And yes, indeed, we in An Garda Síochána have heard that. We have heard the calls from government and we have heard the calls from the communities that we serve and the public to look at the way that we do things and to see how we can do them better. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything's broken. And indeed, Minister Fitzgerald has never described An Garda Síochána as broken, because it isn't. It's damaged, yes. It's hurting, yes. It's in need of change, yes. It's hungry for change, absolutely. And that hunger for change comes from within An Garda Síochána, and it comes from the knowledge and the experience of all of our members, that while we are far from perfect, we have throughout our history and to this present day made a positive contribution to society, and we can do even more. We can build on that. Recent controversies have focused the public mind on instances where we have not lived up to our own standards, in some cases where we've badly failed those standards. But when we're good, we're very, very good. An Garda Síochána are very good at a lot of things that make all of our lives better. We've over 15,000 men and women working across support functions and on the front line who go out each and every day to serve and protect the public, often in very dangerous and stressful circumstances. We have members of the service who, even when off duty, are prepared to put their lives on the line to stop criminality and in the interest of protecting others. We have a police service that is not simply based in communities around the country, but is of them. This close connection with the community is the envy of police services around the world, as is the support that we get every single day from the communities that we live in, that we work in and that we serve. We are a true definition of a decentralised organisation, with members interacting with citizens from every corner and county throughout the land, and indeed further afield. Even today, as I speak, we have members in Malawi who are teaching community policing and giving our experience of community policing as part of the Irish Aid programme to the government and the police service in Malawi. We have a proud record of protecting this country from sophisticated subversive organisations that were, and some still are, determined to inflict anarchy, mayhem and murder on our people with the aim of destroying the democratic functions of the state. We have dismantled vicious organised crime gangs who don't care about the trail of destruction, despair and mayhem that they leave behind in local communities as they push their drugs and inflict harm and misery. We've made our roads safer, so we now have over 200 fewer deaths on our roads than this time 10 years ago. These things don't happen by accident. They happen through well-thought-out design, professional delivery, management, supervision and review. They happen because, for the overwhelming majority of Gardaí, that sense of pride, that sense of collegiality, of being ready to contribute what we have, and that we got the feeling that we had when we were in Templemore, and we all passed out of Templemore. Well, in my day, passed out. These days, we graduate. But that feeling when we all graduated or passed out and tossed our caps in the air, it never goes away. It never goes away, that sense of belonging to something special and something that matters. And earlier this evening when I arrived here, I met a number of retired members, and that feeling never ever goes away. And all of the things that I'm saying, the pride, the hurt, the desire to do something different, belongs to everybody, including the retired members. It really makes a difference to be able to contribute something to communities, and something that will actually make a difference to the communities where we all have grown up and we all come from. That doesn't mean we're always blissfully happy, and that we're not happy right throughout our careers. And I'll give you a very short anecdote of my own. I wasn't happy, and never mind blissfully so, early on in the very early 1981, when I joined on Garda Síochána, and I was a tiny bunch of what were called banners, and that's what they called female members in those days. And because we were Bangardi, we were known as banners. And coming into an overwhelming male organisation. And it wasn't that the organisation didn't want us, although sometimes you could have fooled me when I was young and enthusiastic. But the organisation certainly gave the impression now and then that it wasn't egging to have us doing anything too serious. It was that it had a way of doing things that didn't include women in what could be perceived as operationally dangerous jobs. These days, we'd call it a culture. Back then, they called it right and proper, and it was paternalistic, as opposed to in any way discriminatory. Now, I didn't feel that I was having any of that, because I joined on Garda Síochána to be a guard. I didn't really mind whether I was a man or a woman, I just felt I wanted to be a guard. But I was advised by a very wise sergeant that I had at the time not to be impatient. Now, advising a police officer in their early 20s not to be impatient makes no sense. It's like saying, postpone your hopes and your dreams and wait until the system adjusts in a few decades. I was very impatient, and sometimes I know some of my colleagues that work with me now say I'm still very impatient. But I showed it, and some people in the system didn't like it. And I was there as a young recruit and a young female recruit, which didn't go unnoticed, but I was impatient. And if I give, again, a very short example of what I was impatient about. When I went to Store Street, and I was just speaking to Joe, Store Street in 1981 on Dublin's north inner city was a very different place than it is today. And some of what was there at that time still remains, unfortunately, but it has improved considerably. It was a very desolate place, it was very socially deprived, and it provided a ripe ground for drug gangs to try to ply their trade. And the old traditional ways of policing and trying to infiltrate those gangs wasn't really working. They could see you a million miles off coming into flat complexes and housing estates in uniform. But myself and a group of guys that I worked with, we got together and said, you know something, we could actually work this really well. We could go up undercover, and one of my male colleagues said, geez, they'd never suspect a woman, which was very useful, so I had my uses very early on. But on a serious note, we thought of the idea that if we went in and posed as drug addicts, that we could actually infiltrate these gangs and get the evidence that was needed to actually prosecute them. And some people didn't like that idea. Some people didn't really want to listen to our ideas. We were young recruits and we actually probably knew nothing, and that we would have to wait and learn. But the great thing was that a few individuals within the system listened. A few individuals, and one particular individual who I don't mind naming here, and unfortunately he's long since left us, our superintendent of the day, Tommy O'Reilly, and Inspector Dennis Mullins, who was the godfather of the drug squad, they listened. And they said, OK, maybe there's something in that idea. So instead of shutting us down and ignoring the idea, they said, OK, firstly, you think you can handle it, you're a woman, you think you can handle it and you want to do more operational stuff? I was saying yes. And then I thought about it twice, because they said, OK, we're going to give you a chance, but you better not fail. But they gave us a chance. And yes, it worked. And they told us to prove it, and we had to prove it. But they put us in roles that were new to me and my generation of recruits, different than what had gone before. They listened, and they listened to some dissenting voices. They didn't listen and they didn't accept without challenging and without questioning and without telling us that some of our ideas were a bit harebrained and needed to be thought out again. But they did listen, and they listened very carefully. And that's why I firmly believe that the first step to progress in any situation is actively listening to people. It's about listening, but also challenging and questioning. Senior management in Garda Síochána has been spending a lot of time doing just that recently. Listening to our staff, all of our members, listening to our critical friends, such as the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, and I see Conor Brady here earlier, and the Garda Inspectorate, listening to the public, and initiatives such as the Justice Committee's hearing on the Garda Síochána Act and the Minister for Justice's recent policing forum in Farmley have proven invaluable avenues in that regard. So what's the next step? The next step is engagement. And what do I mean by that? Because engagement can sound very hollow. But the simple fact of the matter is that every citizen of this country, anyone who holidays here, anyone who chooses to do business here, or anyone who seeks refuge here, has a valid, vested interest in An Garda Síochána. Very few organisations can lay claim to the whole and varying level of engagement to which we can lay claim. That level of engagement with each and every community throughout the land allows us to rebuild trust. It will allow us to do that because without the trust of the communities and of the people that we serve, our job's impossible. That's why, since the day I became Interim Commissioner, I've welcomed the opportunity to discuss the future of An Garda Síochána with anyone, group or individual, who wants to inform our thinking. And I know indeed there are some people in this room and further afield who really have been sorry that they've told me they have some idea, because I do ask them and question them about it. And sometimes people say it hasn't always been that way. But before anybody gets the idea for a moment that I'm criticising previous administrations, I'm certainly not. They met the needs of their time. The needs of our time and the needs of now are different, and we've learned that the hard way. Hard for us and for those who wanted to alert us to problems. We know now that if you concentrate too much on the messenger, sometimes you may miss the message. So we've surveyed our own members and got some really very useful insights and ideas. And very surprisingly, there's nothing that actually we didn't know, or there's nothing that we haven't heard from the public. And just if I use, again, one example, the Ministers' session in Farmlee, where there were people invited from various backgrounds and from right across the country. I brought 6 officers to the session in Farmlee, and we weren't there to talk, but we were there to question, to listen and to learn. And that's my personal mantra, to question, to listen and to learn. What I've heard as a result of that has been painful, illuminating, exciting and exhilarating, all at the same time. And, you know, I was reminded recently by a friend about Gareth Fitzgerald's biography, and at one stage Gareth Fitzgerald had said that anything that's a perception generally held is a reality that must be dealt with. And when we were listening and hearing what people were saying to us, one of the criticisms coming from inside and outside the service was that we'd stop listening and become an echo chamber. Because we'd always done something a certain way, the assumption was that it would always be done that way. Wrong. It's wrong even in terms of our own history. Recently I attended the launch of an exhibition in Castlebar which covered the history of policing in our country for 200 years. 2 things struck me as I looked at the various photographs and documents and paraphernalia that make up the exhibition. Firstly, I felt a great sadness and pride reading about the Gardaí who lost their lives in the course of their duty. Secondly, I was fascinated by how flexible our history showed us to be, how we policed Ireland now, as opposed to 200 years ago, utterly in contrast with each other. But at the same kind of quantum shift has happened in how we police Ireland now, as opposed to when I joined An Garda Síochána. I was going to say which isn't that long ago, but I've given away the secret, so I can't say that. As an organisation, we've been pretty good during my service at development and change. In my 3 decades in policing, I have seen huge amounts of change and huge amounts of response to changes that were required and demanded of us. But here's the thing, and I ask myself sometimes, so I've seen all that, what's going to be different? And I think what's different now, if I share my opinion, is that sometimes that development and change comes gradually. And sometimes, as in right now, it's explosive. When it happens explosively, then the task is to be out in front of the reform, to drive change from within and not just to accept it under duress. This means taking control of our future while welcoming stronger oversight from the proposed independent authority, as well as GSOC and the Garda Inspectorate. Equally important to me, it means remaining accountable to the communities we serve and listening and actively listening to what those communities want from their police service. It means building on what is good in our culture, and there's much that's good about our culture. Our esprit de corps, our community ethos, our dedication to duty and public service that are essential to our ability to deliver policing. While recognising and exercising the negative elements of that culture, our insularity, our deafness to external criticism, and our instinctive rejection of internal dissent. And I think it's fair to say that those things aren't just true of An Garda Síochána, I think they're true of every single individual in the room, and they're true of most institutions and most organisations. Most individuals, as people, we don't like to hear criticisms of ourselves, and our natural instinct is to push away the criticism and reject it. So I'm not just criticising on Garda Síochána when I say that. I think that's an innate human response to criticism. Now, all of that might be dismissed as motherhood and apple pie, but it isn't. It's a statement of intent, a statement of pride and intent. We on Garda Síochána are proud of what we do and where we have come from. We are ready to step up and to continue to improve in becoming a human rights-centred, world-class policing service. And I think that's really important. We might be a tiny little island, and when we're measured against other police forces, we may be seen as relatively small, but in fact we're not. We're one of the biggest police forces in Europe. But I think as an island, and as a country and as a state, we owe it to our society to become a world-class police service, and indeed to set the trend. The Garda Síochána Act of 2005 was a significant legislative initiative which brought clarity to the management and oversight of policing in the country. But it is legislation that is approaching its 10th anniversary. Ireland has changed utterly in those 10 years, economically, demographically, in terms of diversity, expectation, everything. Bottom line, the Act needs revising, and a key element of that revision is the establishment of an independent policing authority. I believe an independent policing authority will provide an additional layer of trust and confidence in policing. The way I envisage the policing authority working, and I think it's very important, and I heard some of the discussions last night, I think it's very important that we take the time to get it right. I think that we owe it to Irish society to make sure that the structures that we put in place are well thought out, considered, constituted appropriately, and that will sustain us way, way beyond the next decade. The way I envisage it working is that the Commissioner will be accountable to the Policing Authority in respect of all policing matters, and on national security, the Commissioner would report to the Minister, the Oireachtas and Government. Clearly, Minister Fitzgerald is moving ahead on a number of reforms right across her portfolio, and we're right in the middle of that portfolio. We will respond to the new requirements that the Minister lays down, but we have to do a whole lot more than that, and we're doing it. On Garda Síochána is not standing still. We are making our own internal changes and changes for the better. For instance, we recently advertised for a civilian head of human resources, and indeed that was mooted a number of years ago, but we have now advertised from it. From a Garda perspective, this is a massive shift, as will mean for the first time in the history of the organisation, a civilian with relevant professional expertise, which is really important, will play a key role in ensuring that our people management practice supports the development of our people. And I think that's critically important because I know it can be seen as an old adage, but our people are our greatest asset, and they deserve the best in people management practices. We will also shortly start quarterly tracking of public sentiment towards Garda Síochána, what the public want us to prioritise, and how victims of crime feel they have been treated. What can we do better? How can we improve? This will enable us to be much more reactive to the needs of the public and not just wait for problems to happen. Recently, I was discussing a lot of these things in headquarters, which is in the Phoenix Park, and one of our history buffs, and we have some of them in Garda headquarters, pointed out to me, I was saying about the Peelian principles. So Robert Peel was the godfather of policing, and I was saying that the Peelian principles, which set out the 9 principles of policing, are as valid now as they were in 1860. But this very important history buff that we have reminded me that actually those principles weren't developed by Sir Robert Peel, but by police commissioners of the day, which would be the equivalent to our chief superintendents. The division was clear and productive back then. It was Robert Peel's job to lay down policy, to establish the mission and controls of the new service. It was the job of the commissioners to take that policy and drive it into understood standards and lived behaviours within the police service. In the same way today, Garda management must drive government policy into understood standards and lived behaviours within the police service into what is called the culture of Garda Síochána. Culture is how any organisation does its business. Simple as that. But some of what constitutes culture can be governed or at least informed by stated standards or mechanisms like the confidential recipient or policies and regulations protecting people from being bullied, harassed or victimised in the workplace. And for the record, I can state that I will certainly not tolerate any bullying or harassment or victimisation of any type of any of our members. But culture is much more than minimum standards and protection of people in the workplace. It's about pride and place. It's about trusting colleagues and being trusted by the people we serve. It's about wanting to be not best in class, but better than best in class, from the reserve to the topmost ranks. That's it as far as I'm concerned. For as long as I serve in this role, I'll drive ahead on all of these objectives, because we cannot afford to stand still. The Irish people deserve a police force that they can be proud of. Right now, I'm working with the team in headquarters and within An Garda Síochána to produce a transformational plan that will see significant changes in how the organisation is managed and how we deliver our service. I believe that plan will not only meet the needs articulated by the Minister and the aspirations articulated by rank-and-file Gardaí right around the country as we went around and met and listened and heard what they had to say, but it will also take account of the review being conducted by the Garda Inspectorate under the auspices of Haddington Road and incorporate the learning and findings of recent reports. It's not going to be something that's written in stone. It's going to be something that's very organic and very adaptable and able to meet all of those things and incorporate all of those things. Most importantly, it will ensure that we are in tune with a changed Irish society. It will move An Garda Síochána beyond apology to full confident delivery on a refreshed agenda. Our mission, which we must never lose sight of, is to stand between the citizen and chaos, guarding the peace that is essential to civilised living. We're out on the streets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, doing just that. We're stopped by tourists, we're stopped for a chat, and we're stopped by those in distress. We're in constant and varied interaction with the public all day, every day. As a bare minimum, the public we exist to serve is entitled to a police service that treats it with respect and courtesy, not to mention dignity. As a bare minimum, our police service must respond to an increasingly diverse Ireland with enthusiasm and openness. A good example of this in action was the policing of the recent One Direction concerts in Croke Park. My nieces were very impressed when I told them I was going to a One Direction concert, but actually I was going to brief our members who were actually policing that concert. And I wanted to meet them because the concert went for 3 nights in a row, and each night there were over 80,000 people there. So over those 3 nights there were 240,000 little people and not so little people, but parents, and some of them very concerned parents, dropping their young children off to go to these concerts. But what I thought was important about it was an opportunity for all of our guards that were there to actually meet the public that were coming to those concerts of all ages and to reassure them. And when I spoke to the guards, what I told them was that I wanted to be sure that every encounter that they had with every person that they met there that day and that evening and over the 3 days would make sure that we were reinforcing the good that's in our organisation. And you know, I met a team of Gardaí and Reserve Gardaí there that were so enthusiastic, not just about ensuring that all of the little VIPs who were due to attend that night were treated to a night that they would never forget and would be safe, but also enthusiastic people who got exactly what I was saying, who saw the opportunity to go out and to meet the people in the business communities, to meet the people that were coming to the concert, and to make sure that they reinforced the good that's in An Garda Síochána. I told the team that were there that public confidence in An Garda Síochána can only be restored by them and that by the people in our support offices, one encounter at a time, one interaction at a time. And every single person that is there and every single member of our organisation, in the way they interact with individual members of the community, will make that difference. One of the oldest principles in police investigation applies here, and I saw two very good friends of mine, I see 3 now, but Dr. Sheila Willis and Dr. John Fox. Sheila is the director of the Forensic Science Laboratory. And I remember being fascinated the first time as a young detective I heard about Dr. Edmund Lockhart, who's the Sherlock Holmes of France. Because long before electron microscopes or DNA testing, Lockhart worked out that, as he put it, every contact leaves a trace. And here's what Lockhart said about the criminal. Whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even without consciousness, will serve as a silent witness against him. His fingerprints or footprints, his hair, the fibres from his clothes, the glass he breaks, the tool mark he leaves, the paint he scratches, the blood or semen he deposits or collects, all of these and more bear mute witness against him. Now, Lockhart was talking about physical evidence back at the beginning of the 20th century. In the 21st century, we've begun to realise that in addition to shedding fibres and cells, we shed impressions. That every contact leaves a trace applies to more than just the inanimate. Every contact between every member of An Garda Síochána and a member of the public leaves a trace on both sides. And I spoke to a group of reserves recently, and I was making this point, and next week I'm going to speak to a group of newly promoted sergeants and inspectors, and I'm going to make the same point. It's up to us to make sure that it's a good impression. That's our job, each and every one of us in the organisation. We're at a point in the organisation's history where we've been given the chance to remould it. We have the commitment of our personnel, over 15,000 dedicated, highly professional men and women. We have a great history, a proud legacy, and above all, we have the positive impetus provided by negative events. None of us would want the recent controversies to have happened, but the fact that they have happened means that we've been forced to stand back from what the Minister called the accretion of habits and re-examine ourselves and our organisation in a brutally honest way. As a result, this is an incredibly exciting time to be leading An Garda Síochána. It's an opportunity wrapped up in a challenge with urgent written all over it. Decisions made over the next few weeks and months will have repercussions for society for decades to come and for generations to come, and for the dedicated men and women of An Garda Síochána in their service of that society. It's critical, therefore, that we strike the right balance between continuity and change, so that what is good about An Garda Síochána is kept and what is not is rectified, and that we never lose sight of the wider goal, which is to build a police service for Ireland, which is quite simply the best of its kind in the world. So thank you very much.